3:07 in the morning. She ended their marriage the way someone signs a termination letter. Vanessa Hart stood in the living room, the kitchen light casting a sharp glow across her cheekbones. Her voice was flat, steady, without hesitation. She would not sleep with him anymore. He could deal with it himself. No apology. No explanation. She did not even look him in the eye, the man who had shared her bed for 10 years. Ethan Caldwell stood there still holding his car keys. He had just come home from Summit European Auto after a long day handling customer complaints. The smell of engine oil still clung to his jacket. He looked at his wife, the woman who had once smiled beneath a Florida sunset at their beach wedding, now sounding like an HR director delivering a restructuring notice. Inside his chest, something clicked softly. No one heard it, but it was clearer than the hum of the air conditioner cutting through the night. Vanessa waited. She had braced herself for shouting for accusations for wounded eyes. She expected him to react the way she had always believed he would, a hard-working, decent man, a little rough around the edges, predictable. But Ethan said nothing. He looked around the house in Clearwater, the white fence, the lawn he trimmed every weekend, the imported leather sofa the wedding photo centered on the wall. Perfect on the outside, hollow within. He had known not tonight, not because of her sentence, but months ago, when she began coming home, late 3 or 4 nights a week, when business trips to Miami conveniently stretched into weekends, when she changed her phone password, when their bedroom turned into 2 silent territories on a king-sized bed. He had known, he just had not been ready to name it. Infidelity? Betrayal. A marriage crisis wrapped in tailored gray suits and polished speeches about personal growth. Vanessa tightened her grip around the glass of water. His silence unsettled her. Say something, she thought. React. Ethan finally spoke. Only 2 words. I understand. His voice did not crack. It did not tremble. It was simply cold. Vanessa faltered, and she did not understand why disappointment flickered through her. She did not know that inside Ethan's mind the pieces were already shifting. The unusual charges on their joint account, the boutique hotel receipts labeled as business expenses, the expensive dinners he had never been invited to. He was not as simple as she believed. He managed more than 30 technicians, oversaw a multi-million-dollar quarterly operation. People trusted him with the keys to an entire service facility, with contracts from demanding European car brands. Yet inside this house, he had been reduced to a reliable wallet, a silent provider. Vanessa turned away, believing she had just regained control. She did not realize she had handed him a reason. Ethan placed his keys on the table and walked upstairs, each step measured and steady, not from pain, but from clarity. In the bedroom, he opened the closet and pulled out a duffel bag. He packed enough clothes for a week, his laptop, a few important documents, his passport. He picked up the wedding photo from the nightstand. She was smiling. He was smiling. 2 young people convinced that love alone would be enough. He turned the frame face down. Downstairs, Vanessa sat on the couch, her heart beating faster. Why was he not arguing? Why was he not asking for another chance? She had prepared for a battle, not this quiet retreat. Ethan came back down and placed the house keys on the table. He would not be sleeping there tonight. That was all he said. The door opened, and the night air from the coast slipped into the living room. The door closed. Vanessa stood abruptly and stepped onto the porch, but the pickup truck was already turning off the street. In that moment, she did not feel free. She felt unsteady, as if something beneath her had shifted. Ethan drove through dark streets, streetlights sliding across the windshield like fading memories. He did not cry. He did not shake. He simply thought. She had told him to deal with it. He would deal with it. Not with tears, not with pleading, with strategy. Somewhere in the city, a divorce attorney named Charles Wainwright, was sleeping peacefully, unaware that in a few hours he would receive a call from a man who had stopped being underestimated and stopped being a victim. And Vanessa, convinced she was still in control, had no idea that tonight was not the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a reversal. 3:07 in the morning. One cold sentence, one door closing, and a man finally waking up from a role he should never have accepted. 4:23 in the morning, Ethan was not asleep. He was dismantling his marriage line by line into cold data on a glowing screen. Noah Briggs opened the door while the sky was still pitch dark. He took one look at Ethan's face and asked tithing. He simply stepped aside. Under the yellow light of the garage, the two men stood facing each other, the smell of engine oil mixing with the scent of the night. Noah could feel that something had broken, but he also saw that in his friend's eyes, there was no collapse, there was focus. Ethan sat at Noah's kitchen table and opened his laptop. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the precision of an engineer. No trembling, no hesitation. He logged into their joint account. The statements appeared, each transaction surfacing like fragments of a story he had already suspected. A boutique beachfront hotel, 2 nights labeled as a business expense. A rooftop restaurant bill 3 times higher than any dinner they had shared together. Round-trip tickets to Miami over a weekend. Noah placed a can of beer in front of him. Ethan did not drink. He was reading. From the outside, anyone looking in might assume he was simply a husband, trying to understand why he had been left behind. But inside Ethan's mind, the gears of strategy were already turning. He was not just a service department manager. He coordinated more than 30 technicians, handled customer crises, resolved complaints that could collapse contracts worth millions of dollars. He knew how to read signals, calculate risks, and step back at the right moment to win the entire board. Vanessa had always thought he was only good at tightening bolts and signing invoices. She had never noticed that he was the one who restructured the entire service division when the company had nearly lost 50% of its revenue 3 years earlier. He was the one who proposed the cost control system that restored profitability. Ethan's power was not loud, it was prepared. He transferred his personal savings into a separate account. He set spending limits on their joint credit cards. He saved every statement into a folder simply labeled evidence. Noah watched him and finally asked quietly, "What are you going to do?" Ethan looked up. His eyes were no longer the eyes of a man left behind in a brightly lit house. They were sharp and awake. "I am not reacting. I am acting." Across the city, Vanessa lay alone in their bed. She tossed and turned. She replayed how easily he had walked out. She reassured herself that he would come back. He had always been the one who needed stability. He needed her. She believed that. But she did not know that with every passing minute, Ethan was peeling away layers of illusion. He discovered a small transfer, repeated monthly, sent to an unfamiliar account. Not a large amount, but consistent. It was the consistency that made it dangerous. He circled it in his spreadsheet. This was no longer suspicion, this was structure. 4:58 in the morning, Ethan picked up his phone. He searched for a name whispered often in Tampa's business circles, Charles Wainwright, a divorce attorney who was not cheap, not gentle, and did not believe in half measures. Ethan did not call immediately. He stared at the screen for several seconds. This was the point of no return. Then he pressed the number. The line rang. No answer. Too early. He left a concise message, clear and direct. His name. Years married. There was a prenup. Suspected infidelity. Urgent consultation needed. No complaints. No wasted emotion. When he set the phone down, the sky was beginning to lighten. A pale blue glow filtered through Noah's kitchen window. A new day was rising. Noah studied his friend and realized something Vanessa had never truly seen. Ethan was not a weak man clinging to a hollow marriage. He was patient, and he waited for timing. Being underestimated was an advantage. Ethan closed his laptop and finally took his first sip of beer. The bitterness slid down his throat, not from pain, but from clarity. She had told him to deal with it. He would deal with it, not with words, but with the law. And when Vanessa finally understood that the man she once dismissed as a safe wallet was sitting across from a lawyer, ready to tear through every layer of illusion, it might already be too late. The sun rose. Ethan was no longer the man who had left his house in the dark. He was the man preparing to return with a plan. Vanessa's old laptop was still logged in, and that was her first mistake. Ethan stood in the home office of the Clearwater house at 11:12 in the morning. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, carving pale streaks across the wooden floor. The house was silent, too silent, as if it were holding its breath. He had waited until the location on Vanessa's phone showed she was at Blue Currant's office, an old habit she never imagined he knew about. Vanessa had always believed she was the smarter one. She had always believed he did not notice details. The office door closed softly behind him. He stepped toward the wooden desk where the old MacBook sat under a thin layer of dust. 6 months earlier, she had switched to a new company-issued laptop. The old one had been abandoned like something that no longer mattered. But data does not forget. Ethan opened the computer. The screen lit up. No password required, no security alert. The iCloud account was still synced. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes, not because he feared the truth, but because he knew that once he opened it, there would be no turning back. He clicked on messages. The first name that appeared was Grant Mercer. The conversation stretched back 8 months, lines filled with coded affection, meetings disguised beneath sweet language. Ethan scrolled line by line, word by word. Vanessa wrote about him as if she were describing an object. Stable, safe, kind, but dull. A reliable financial source. Grant replied with calculated encouragement. She deserved passion. She should not live inside the cage of obligation. She needed a man who truly understood her. Ethan felt his heartbeat remain steady. Not faster, not slower. Just steady. He opened her email. Hotel receipts in Miami 2 weekend nights. A bill in Key West 3 days marked as an HR seminar. Airline tickets purchased with their joint credit card. He opened photos. A picture of 2 glasses of wine at sunset by the ocean. A man's arm visible at the edge of the frame. No face, but enough intimacy. Vanessa had assumed he would never notice details like that. She thought he was busy with engines and spare parts. She had forgotten that Ethan once uncovered a technician's fraud by cross-referencing work hours and parts consumption. She had forgotten he saved a $4.3 million contract by spotting a minor discrepancy in an expense report. He did not need noise to prove he was sharp. Ethan began taking screenshots, messages, emails, calendar entries, bank statements. He created a new folder and named it Evidence Part 3. His hands moved faster now. The climax was not in emotion. It was in speed. He reopened the bank statements and cross-checked dates with the messages. The night Vanessa said she had to stay late at the office that same evening, a South Beach restaurant charge appeared. Everything aligned perfectly. At Blue Currant's office, Vanessa was presenting to her management team. She spoke about transparency, about a culture of trust, about accountability. She did not know that at home those very words were suffocating her. Somewhere in a luxury apartment, Grant texted to ask if she was okay. He had never intended anything long-term. For Grant, an affair was a game. For Vanessa, it was an escape. Ethan read a message that darkened his gaze. After one rare intimate night with her husband, Vanessa wrote that it felt like fulfilling an obligation to a business partner. She compared Ethan to a long-term contract devoid of emotion. For a brief second, he felt a deep cut, not because she had slept with another man, but because of the cold contempt woven into her words. But he did not allow emotion to lead. He backed up the entire archive onto 3 separate drives. 1 copy uploaded to his private cloud. He reviewed every file. Evidence was not anger. Evidence was power. When Ethan finally stood up, the room seemed smaller, not because he had grown, but because he now saw the entire structure of the betrayal. 8 months. Systematic. Calculated. Vanessa had not only cheated, she had used their shared money to finance her adventure. She spoke of freedom while keeping her financial safety net intact. Ethan closed the laptop. In that moment, the roles shifted. The man who had been underestimated now held the truth that could dismantle the perfect image Vanessa had built. The husband she had labeled boring now possessed what a divorce attorney could turn into a decisive blow. The house remained silent. The sunlight still filtered through the curtains. But Ethan knew. The game had changed, and this time he was no longer standing outside of it. Vanessa proposed an open marriage as if it were a noble idea. She wanted freedom while still keeping the key to the safe. The cafe in downtown Tampa was flooded with afternoon sunlight, clear glass walls, light wooden tables, the steady hiss of the espresso machine in the background. Vanessa was already seated in the far corner, her back against the wall, positioned so she could see the entire room. A habit of someone who always needed control. She wore a cream-colored suit, her hair neatly tied back, her lipstick flawless. From the outside, no one would guess that this woman had maintained a secret affair for 8 months. Ethan walked in, wearing a simple button-down shirt, with the sleeves rolled up, his expression calm. People who glanced at him would see only an ordinary service manager. No one could see the evidence files secured in his hard drive. Vanessa smiled the kind of smile polished through countless boardroom meetings. She asked if he was doing all right where he was staying, whether he needed anything. The question sounded caring, but felt hollow. Ethan answered briefly, just enough, nothing more. She waited for him to ask something in return. He did not. A pause stretched between them. Then Vanessa set her latte down and began. She said they were adults now, they should be realistic. Marriage did not have to mean exclusivity. She spoke about an open marriage as if it were progressive and enlightened. They could remain legally married for tax benefits, insurance, social image. They could continue co-owning the house. They could still appear together at events. But each of them would be free to pursue their own emotional needs. She said the word freedom with a brightness in her eyes. She did not say the word betrayal. In Vanessa's mind, this was the perfect arrangement. She would keep the financial stability Ethan provided. She would not have to divide assets. She would not face the risk of a messy divorce. And she could continue seeing Grant without secrecy. She believed Ethan would accept it because he had always been agreeable, because he avoided conflict, because she thought he was not sharp enough to play power games. But Vanessa did not know that the man sitting across from her had already seen the full structure of her deception. Ethan listened. He nodded at reasonable points. He asked a few questions, as if genuinely considering the proposal. If they remained legally married, who would bear financial liability if one of them created risk? If she continued seeing other men, what would happen if their public image collapsed? Vanessa felt relief wash over her. She thought he was beginning to agree. She even reached out and lightly touched his hand, telling him she was proud of how mature he was being. Ethan looked at that hand, the same hand that had once slipped a wedding ring onto his finger. In that moment, the truth turned inside out. Vanessa did not want freedom. She wanted privilege. She wanted a stable man as a foundation, while she chased excitement without consequence. Ethan allowed himself the faintest smile, a smile Vanessa misunderstood. He said he needed time to think. This was a major decision. He did not want to act out of emotion. Vanessa exhaled in relief. She believed she had won. She did not know that earlier that morning Charles Wainwright had finished reviewing all the evidence and said one short sentence over the phone. "We have enough to activate the infidelity clause in the prenup." The very clause Vanessa's father had insisted she sign before the wedding. The clause she once dismissed with a laugh, certain she would never be the one placed at a disadvantage. While Vanessa spoke about a flexible modern future, Ethan looked past her shoulder, through the glass windows, at the steady flow of traffic outside. He was not angry. He was not wounded. He was calculating. An open marriage was not a solution. It was the final proof that she believed he would accept anything. Vanessa stood first, adjusting her handbag. She looked at him with the confidence of someone who believed she had negotiated successfully. Ethan stood afterward. He shook her hand like a business partner. When she walked out of the cafe, she had no idea the game had shifted to another level. The man she once considered safe was now holding a legal card capable of dismantling the perfect image she had built. Being underestimated was Ethan's greatest advantage. He took out his phone and sent a brief message to Charles. "She just proposed an open marriage. We proceed." Outside, the Tampa sun blazed as it always did. Inside, a war was preparing to erupt, and this time, Ethan was no longer defending. He was choosing the moment to strike. The divorce papers were served to Vanessa in the middle of the most important presentation of the quarter, and it was not an accident. At 10:32 in the morning, the 12th floor conference room at Blue Currant was silent. Vanessa stood before the projection screen, outlining a new human resources strategy, speaking about transparency, accountability, and corporate culture. Her voice was steady, her posture confident. The executive team sat in front, several board members behind them, all attentive. Then the conference room door opened. A man in a gray suit walked in holding a thick envelope. He did not rush. He did not apologize. Vanessa paused for half a second, assuming it was supplemental material. The man calmly asked for her full name. When she nodded, he handed her the envelope and informed her that she had just been served legal documents. The room seemed to lose its air. Vanessa forced a tight smile and suggested there must be a mistake. But when her eyes landed on the words, "Divorce Petition," in the Circuit Court of Florida, the color drained from her face. Ethan had chosen this moment, not out of cruelty, but out of strategy. Charles Wainwright had once said a simple sentence: "If you strike, strike when your opponent feels safest." Vanessa asked for 5 minutes and stepped into the hallway. Her hands trembled as she opened the file. The first page was the divorce petition. The second page referenced the prenup and invoked the infidelity clause. The third page contained printed copies of her messages with Grant Mercer, clear and undeniable. The following pages included hotel receipts, airline tickets, restaurant bills, each aligned precisely with specific dates. Cold sweat slid down her spine. She had never believed Ethan would dare to do this. She had always assumed he was too gentle to act, too proud to humiliate her at work. She was wrong. Across town, Ethan stood inside the service bay, at the dealership, holding a vehicle inspection clipboard. His phone vibrated. A message from Charles. Successfully served. Ethan did not smile. He gave a slight nod, as if confirming another completed step in a carefully designed plan. Vanessa returned to the conference room. Her lipstick was still red, her blazer still perfectly pressed, but her eyes had changed. She tried to finish her presentation. Her voice wavered once or twice. A board member watched her with quiet suspicion. Rumors began spreading faster than any internal memo ever could. Within an hour, Vanessa's phone buzzed non-stop. She checked for missed calls from Ethan. There were none. She searched for messages from him. Nothing. The only calls flooding in were from Grant. She called him back as soon as she reached the parking lot. Her voice was urgent as she asked whether he knew about this. Grant hesitated for a few seconds, then said he did not want to be dragged into a divorce. He had a major contract under negotiation. He needed to avoid scandal. Vanessa stood frozen in the middle of the parking lot. The man who had promised to live authentically with her was now calculating his own exposure. Back at the dealership, Noah asked Ethan whether he felt guilty. Ethan wiped his hands with an oil-stained cloth, his expression calm. He had not destroyed her career. She had done that herself when she used shared money to fund her affair and assumed no one would notice. Being underestimated was the perfect disguise. Vanessa, who had always believed she was in control, now had to explain to her executive team why a process server had entered her boardroom. She no longer spoke about transparency. She spoke about privacy. But evidence carries no emotion. That afternoon, Vanessa called Ethan for the first time. 10 missed calls in 2 hours. He did not answer. She sent messages. "You are cruel. You are destroying everything. You will regret this." Ethan looked at the screen and set the phone down. Not because he did not hear it, but because he chose silence. In a legal battle, every unnecessary word is a risk. As sunset fell over Tampa, red light reflected against the glass towers downtown. Vanessa sat alone in her apartment, the file spread across the table. For the first time, she understood something she had never considered. Ethan was not a man she could manipulate. He was a man who waited for the right moment. And when he moved, he did not shout. He filed. The game was no longer about marriage, it was about the law. And this time, Vanessa was no longer the one writing the script. Vanessa showed up at Noah's house at 9 in the evening, her hair disheveled mascara smeared beneath her eyes. The woman who once commanded an entire boardroom now stood trembling under the porch light. She pounded on the door. Noah opened it, took one look at her, then turned and called Ethan without letting her step inside. Ethan walked into the hallway, the warm light casting shadows across his face. No anger, no triumph. Just cold clarity. Vanessa did not wait for him to speak. She exploded. "Are you insane? Do you have any idea what you just did? You served me divorce papers in the middle of a board meeting." Her voice cracked between fury and panic. Ethan watched her the way someone watches a storm folding in on itself. She accused him of destroying her reputation. She called him cruel. She said he humiliated her in front of her colleagues. In Vanessa's mind, she was still the victim. She still believed she had been attacked unfairly. Ethan listened without interrupting. Then her anger dissolved into tears. She said the affair meant nothing. She said Grant was a mistake. She insisted she never intended to leave the marriage. Ethan remembered every message, every line where she described him as financial stability, every word about passion and freedom. A mistake does not last 8 months with regular hotel receipts. A mistake is not paid for with a joint credit card. Vanessa stepped closer, her voice softening. "We can fix this. I will cut him off. I will go to counseling. I will do anything." Ethan could see the real fear now. Not fear of losing him, but fear of losing the safety net he represented. He took out his phone and opened the image folder. He held it up for her to see. The message she sent Grant after one rare, intimate night with her husband, calling it an obligation to a business partner. Vanessa read it, her face draining of color. She did not remember writing those words with such cold detachment, but printed text does not lie. She shifted tactics again. "You had no right to invade my privacy. That was personal data." Her voice trembled, yet she tried to sound legally rational. Ethan spoke clearly and firmly for the first time. "That laptop was in our shared home. That account was accessed on shared property. And you used our shared money to fund your affair. Each sentence landed like a stone set deliberately on a table. He did not raise his voice, but every word carried weight. Vanessa stepped back. In her mind, the prenup her father had insisted she sign before the wedding flashed vividly, the infidelity clause she once dismissed as unnecessary. She looked at the man before her, as if seeing him for the first time. Not the agreeable husband who always yielded, not the man who avoided confrontation, but someone who had waited long enough to strike at the right moment. "You told me to deal with it." Ethan said, his voice low but steady. "I dealt with it." Vanessa fell silent. Noah stood behind them, witnessing the unraveling of a marriage he once assumed had simply grown incompatible. This was not an argument. This was consequence. Vanessa made one final attempt. "If this goes to court, you will lose too. The assets will be split 50%. Ethan gave a faint shake of his head. "Not under the prenup you signed." The sentence landed like a final blade. Vanessa understood. She had signed that document when she believed she would always control the situation. She never imagined it would return as a legal weapon. She stood motionless for a few seconds, then the tears came for real. No strategy, no arguments, only fear. Ethan opened the door slightly wider, not to invite her in, but to close the chapter. "All communication from now on goes through our attorneys," he said. He stepped back inside. The door shut. Vanessa remained on the porch, listening to the dry click of the lock. In that moment, she realized she had not just lost a man. She had lost her anchor. Inside the house, Ethan leaned against the door for a few seconds. He did not tremble, but he did not feel joy either. Victory does not deliver instant happiness. It delivers silence. A heavy silence, but a clean one. He knew courtrooms, hearings, and legal battles lay ahead. But he also knew one thing. From this moment forward, he was no longer the betrayed husband waiting for explanations. He was the one deciding the ending. Grant Mercer disappeared after a single phone call, and that was the moment Vanessa realized she had gambled on the wrong man. 3 days after the divorce papers were served, Vanessa sat in her attorney's office, her face pale beneath the cold white lights. A thick file lay on the desk pages, turning one after another, each piece of evidence arranged in an order that could not be denied. Her attorney, a sharp woman named Marissa Keene, read each line with narrowed eyes. She did not look at Vanessa with sympathy. She looked at her as if assessing damage. The infidelity clause in the prenup had been activated. The evidence was clear. Funds from the joint account had been used to finance the affair. Marissa set her pen down. "This is not good," she said plainly. Vanessa tried to remain composed. She mentioned invasion of privacy. She brought up the possibility that assets would still have to be split 50%. She argued that Ethan would also suffer if the case dragged on. Marissa shook her head. "If everything is as solid as what they have submitted, the court will enforce the prenup. And if it is proven that you used shared funds for the affair, their position becomes even stronger." Vanessa felt her palms turn cold. She thought about Grant. She had called him twice since that day. The first time he said he needed time. The second time he did not answer. By the third day, Grant's social media accounts were gone. His phone number was unreachable. The man who once told her she deserved to live authentically was now saving himself. Vanessa sat in that law office and felt real loneliness for the first time. Not the loneliness of a fading marriage, but the loneliness of someone who realizes she has burned the last bridge. Across the city, Ethan sat across from Charles Wainwright in a quiet conference room. Sunlight streamed through the large glass windows, reflecting off the polished wood table. Charles did not smile. He simply flipped through the file, marking several points. They will argue invasion of privacy. They will try to delay. They may propose mediation. Ethan nodded. He was not seeking mediation. He was seeking closure. Charles studied him more carefully. He had seen many men in situations like this: angry men, impulsive men, men hungry for revenge. Ethan did not belong to that group. What Charles saw in him was a cold steadiness, not loud, but firm. "Being underestimated is an advantage," Charles said quietly. Ethan did not respond, but his eyes made it clear he understood that better than anyone. In the following days, Vanessa tried to maintain her professional image. She went to the office in tailored suits, walked confidently down the hallway. But the looks had changed. Whispers followed behind her. She no longer spoke about transparency. She spoke about privacy and misunderstanding. At home, her apartment was quieter than ever. No messages from Grant, no weekend plans. Only the divorce documents spread across the table like an indictment. Meanwhile, Ethan continued showing up at the service bay each morning. He inspected cars, met with staff, handled demanding customers. But inside the company, another conversation was unfolding. The board was considering restructuring regional management, and Ethan Caldwell's name was being mentioned as a strong candidate. The man his wife once dismissed as stable and dull was now being evaluated as a strategic leader. Vanessa did not know this. She still believed she was losing more than he was. But the truth was slowly turning. Late one afternoon, Marissa called Vanessa. The other side would not agree to a 50% split. They were determined to enforce the prenup, and the evidence was strong. Vanessa set her phone down and felt the ground beneath her no longer steady. She had always believed she controlled every negotiation, but in this game, she was not the one writing the rules. In Charles' office, Ethan signed several necessary documents. He listened as the attorney explained the next steps, the upcoming hearing, the likely ruling. Ethan no longer felt anger, only a deep clarity. He had not lost everything as Vanessa believed. He was reclaiming what was his. And for the first time in months, as he stepped out of the law office, he felt something simple and undeniable. He was no longer chasing a dead marriage. He was moving forward, alone, but not weak. The final hearing lasted 15 minutes. 15 minutes to close 10 years. The courtroom was not loud like in the movies. There was no dramatic gavel strike, only pale white lights, rows of hard wooden benches, and air heavy as before a storm. Vanessa walked in first, wearing a dark blue suit, her hair neatly tied back as if preparing for a major negotiation. Her chin was lifted, her eyes steady. On the outside, she was still the confident HR director who once managed hundreds of employees. Inside, her stomach tightened. Ethan entered afterward in a simple white shirt, his tie neatly knotted. No one paid him special attention. No flash. No display. But in Charles Wainwright's hands was a thick file, each page carefully marked with precision. The judge, a woman in her 60s, turned each document with the calm of someone who had witnessed far too many similar stories. She did not look at Vanessa with sympathy. She looked with the eyes of the law. Charles presented the case concisely. 10 years of marriage, a prenup signed with full legal representation, a clear infidelity clause, evidence of messages, hotel receipts, credit card statements, the flow of money from the joint account funding the affair. Marissa attempted to counter. She spoke about privacy. She argued that the data had been accessed without direct permission. She emphasized Vanessa's financial contributions in the early years of the marriage. But evidence does not debate. It exists. The judge set her glasses down. The prenup clause will be enforced. The words were calm without emotion. The Clearwater house would be allocated according to the agreement. The majority of assets would go to the party who did not violate the clause. Vanessa would receive reimbursement corresponding to her initial contributions, but not the 50% she had once believed she would claim. In that moment, everything inside Vanessa collapsed. There was no explosion, only emptiness. She had believed Ethan would soften at the last minute. She had believed he would offer a private settlement to preserve both of their reputations. He did not. Ethan sat still as the ruling was read. He did not smile. He did not exhale in relief. He simply listened as someone who already knew the outcome. Noah sat in the back watching his friend close a chapter of his life with remarkable composure. Marissa leaned toward Vanessa and whispered about the possibility of an appeal. Vanessa barely heard her. Her ears rang. She glanced at Ethan. For the first time since everything began, she did not see the predictable man she had once lived with. She saw someone she had never truly understood, a man who had stayed silent long enough to prepare. And when he moved decisively. The hearing ended. 15 minutes, 10 years. Vanessa stood. Her heels clicked sharply against the stone floor. She walked out without looking back. In the hallway, she paused, leaning against the wall for a few seconds. No confident executive, no commanding voice. Just a woman realizing that the freedom she demanded came with a price. Inside the courtroom, Ethan shook Charles's hand. "Thank you," he said simply. Charles nodded. He did not need praise. He looked at Ethan as one looks at a man who has learned a lesson that others take a lifetime to understand. When Ethan stepped outside the courthouse, the Tampa sunlight hit his face directly. The city buzzed as it always did. Cars passed. People laughed. Life did not pause because a marriage ended. Ethan took a deep breath. He did not feel victorious. He did not feel loss. He felt light. Vanessa sat alone in her car in the parking lot, hands resting on the steering wheel, without starting the engine. She thought about the house. She thought about Grant. She thought about promises of a life without constraints. She understood something too late. Freedom is not taking away obligation while keeping privilege. Freedom is accepting consequence. Ethan walked down the courthouse steps when his phone vibrated in his pocket. A message from the company's board. "We would like to discuss the regional manager position." He looked at the screen for a few seconds. The man once labeled dull and predictable was now standing before a new door. The marriage did not end with shouting. It ended with a signature. And this time, Ethan was not only closing a chapter, he was opening another path. 3 weeks after the hearing, the house in Clearwater was listed for sale, and Ethan was the one who signed the transfer contract. The ocean was still there. The wind still moved through the palm trees in front of the porch, but the house was no longer a perfectly framed American dream. It was an old stage where two people had performed happiness for far too long. Ethan walked through each room one last time. The living room with the leather sofa still looking new. The kitchen where Vanessa once spoke about freedom and an open marriage. The bedroom where the distance between them began with silence. He was not angry. He was not nostalgic. He was observing the way he would inspect a vehicle before reselling it, evaluating value, assessing condition, accepting wear. A young couple came to view the house. They spoke about the future, about having children, about redesigning the backyard garden. They looked at the house with the same eyes Ethan once had. He shook their hands and wished them luck. He did not tell them that every dream needs truth to survive. The proceeds from the sale allowed him to pay off the remaining mortgage and still retain a significant amount. According to the prenup, most of the assets belonged to him. Vanessa received a sum corresponding to her initial contribution, nothing more. Vanessa learned that the house had been sold through her lawyer. She sat in her temporary rental apartment and stared out at a concrete parking lot. She once believed that house was proof of her success. Now it was proof of a miscalculation. Grant never returned. Rumors circulated that he was preparing to get engaged to another woman in Orlando. Vanessa neither confirmed nor denied it. She began posting quotes about growth and learning from mistakes on social media. Old friends clicked like. At night, the apartment remained silent. Across the city, Ethan signed the contract for a small townhouse near the coast of St. Petersburg. No white fence, no lawn to mow every weekend, just a balcony overlooking the water and salt air drifting in each morning. On the first day he moved in, he stood alone in the empty room. A faint echo followed his footsteps. He set the final box down on the floor. Everything had ended, and everything was beginning again. The board of directors formally offered him the regional manager position. Higher salary, greater responsibility, broader authority. The man once labeled stable and dull was now recognized as a strategic leader, capable of restructuring. Noah called to congratulate him. He laughed and said that finally, others were seeing what Vanessa never had. Ethan did not criticize her. He simply said that sometimes you have to lose someone to realize you were never as small as they thought. His new life did not explode into triumph like a movie ending. It arrived slowly, ordinary real. Ethan began running along the shoreline every morning. He joined weekend hiking groups. He met people who knew nothing about his past. He dated a few times, nothing serious, nothing rushed. He learned how to be alone without being lonely. One evening, as the sunset painted the water in shades of orange, Ethan stood on his new balcony and looked down at the city. He thought about the months he spent trying to hold together a marriage that was already dead. He thought about how he once believed failure meant the end. Now he understood. Failure is not ending something that no longer lives. Failure is staying because you are afraid to change. Somewhere in her brightly lit apartment, Vanessa stood by her window as well. She looked at her phone waiting for a message that never came. She thought she had chosen freedom. But freedom is not walking away while keeping the benefits. Freedom is walking away and accepting the loss. Ethan inhaled deeply, tasting salt in the air. He was no longer the betrayed husband. He was no longer the underestimated man. He was someone who had walked through collapse without losing himself. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, he understood something simple. That marriage had not taken 10 years from him. It had given him back the rest of his life. 6 months after the divorce, Vanessa lost her job. There was no official scandal, no public statement, just a brief meeting, a restructuring announcement, and the HR director chair was no longer hers. The company needed a new image. Leadership did not say it outright, but everyone understood. Rumors about the divorce, about being served papers in the middle of a strategic presentation, had spread quietly through glass hallways. In the corporate world, reputation is currency, and Vanessa had spent too much of it. She walked out of the office building for the last time, carrying a small box of personal belongings that felt much lighter than the ego she once carried. Across the city, Ethan was leading his first meeting as regional manager. The conference room fell silent when he entered. The people who once saw him as merely steady now looked at him differently. He did not change his demeanor. His voice remained calm and clear, his gaze steady. But the power had shifted. He presented a restructuring plan, cutting wasteful processes, investing in younger teams. The growth figures displayed on the screen were not luck. They were the result of years of quiet observation. People often underestimate those who do not show off. Vanessa once believed Ethan lacked ambition. In truth, he simply never needed to display it. When the meeting ended, board members shook his hand a little longer than usual. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat in her smaller new apartment, sending out resumes. She was still sharp, still capable. Yet every interview carried a carefully worded question about why she had left her previous company. She answered with professional language restructuring strategic differences. But deep down, she knew she was paying for a chain of choices. Grant had disappeared completely. He was truly engaged. A photo of his beach proposal appeared on social media, wide smile ring sparkling. Vanessa looked at the image in silence. She once believed she was irreplaceable. She was wrong. One late evening, she drove near the area of Ethan's townhouse. No clear intention, just an unconscious circle. The balcony light was still on. His silhouette reflected in the glass, holding a glass of wine, speaking with another woman. Vanessa stopped her car for a few seconds. The woman was not extraordinary, but she was smiling an easy smile. Vanessa felt a tightness in her chest. She once thought Ethan would drown, in regret would call back, would need her. But he was living, and living well. Inside the townhouse, Ethan was not thinking about the past. He was talking with Olivia, an architect he met through a hiking group. She knew about his previous marriage enough to understand without digging deeper. She looked at him as a present man, not a betrayed version. Ethan felt that difference clearly. No need to defend, no need to prove. As night fell, Vanessa turned her car around and drove away. She realized a painful truth. The man she once labeled dull now stood in a place she could not reach, not because of money, but because of composure. A week later, Ethan was invited to speak at an industry conference. The topic was leadership in crisis. He stood under white lights and spoke about facing change, about not avoiding truth. He did not tell his personal story, but every sentence carried the weight of experience. The auditorium was silent. Vanessa later watched the recording online. She recognized the familiar voice now stronger than ever. She understood that real power is not found in titles. It lies in the ability to stand firm when everything collapses. Ethan stepped down from the stage, accepting handshakes and praise. He did not think he had defeated anyone. He simply knew he had not lost himself. And in that moment, the distance between them was no longer about money or assets. It was about growth. Vanessa watched the screen fade to black. She once wanted freedom. Now she had it. But freedom without foundation is just emptiness. And Ethan, the man once considered too ordinary, was building a new life, step by steady step, quietly yet impossible to underestimate. 1 year after the divorce, Vanessa was hospitalized for exhaustion. No accident, no dramatic scene. Her body had finally pushed back after months of forcing itself to endure. She lay on a stark white hospital bed, the cold ceiling reflecting fluorescent light above her. The doctor spoke about prolonged stress, about insomnia, about a mind that never truly rested. Vanessa nodded, but what tightened her throat was not the diagnosis. It was the fact that no one was sitting beside her. No steady husband who had once quietly been there. No lover who had promised passion. Just a phone resting on the table, its screen dark. In her weakest moment, she thought of Ethan. Across the city, Ethan was standing before the National Executive Board of the corporation. A new proposal was on the table, expanding operations into 3 neighboring states. He was leading the project. Some in the room had once doubted him. They had believed he was only suited for moderate-scale management. Now they sat in silence as he outlined growth plans, spoke about risk, about long-term strategy. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Real power does not require shouting. When the meeting ended, the chairman stepped forward and lightly tapped his shoulder. "We underestimated you." Ethan smiled slightly. He did not feel satisfaction from being recognized. He felt calm, because at last everything reflected his true value. That evening, when he returned to his townhouse, his phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. It was Vanessa. She did not write much, just 1 sentence. "Can you talk to me for a few minutes?" Ethan stared at the screen for a long time. Olivia was in the kitchen slicing vegetables for dinner. She did not ask who had texted. She simply looked at him, her gaze steady. Ethan understood that the past no longer had authority over the present. He replied briefly, "If necessary, we can talk for 10 minutes." They met at a small coffee shop near the hospital. Vanessa looked thinner, her eyes less sharp. The armor of a human resources director who once controlled every situation was gone. She spoke about work, about being replaced, about the emptiness when everything collapsed at once. She did not blame. She did not justify. Just a woman admitting she had been wrong. Ethan listened, not cold, not weak. He looked at her the way one looks at a closed chapter. "I thought you would need me," Vanessa said softly. "I thought you could not stand on your own." Ethan nodded gently. "I once thought I needed you too." There was no accusation in his voice, no sarcasm, just truth. Vanessa asked one final question. If things had been different, could we start over? The silence lingered. Outside the glass window, people hurried past, each carrying their own story. Ethan looked directly into her eyes. "Not because I hate you, but because I have become someone else. I am no longer the man who accepts less than his worth." Vanessa lowered her head. She understood. Some doors once closed are not sealed by anger, but by growth. When they stood to leave, there was no embrace, no dramatic tears, just two people who once walked the same path, now turning toward different directions. On his way home, Ethan felt light. He could not save the marriage, but he had saved himself. Vanessa returned to the hospital for follow-up visits a few days later. She began therapy not to win anyone back, but to understand herself. That was the difference. Ethan stepped into his home, and Olivia looked up and smiled. She did not question the past. She cared about the present. In that moment, Ethan realized the greatest twist of his life was not the betrayal. It was that he once believed he was smaller than he truly was. The man who had been underestimated now stood firmly in his own worth. No need to prove, only to live honestly. And sometimes victory is not about making someone else lose. It is about not losing yourself. 2 years after the divorce, Ethan turned down a buyout deal worth $4.3 million. The entire boardroom fell silent. It was the kind of number many people would sell their soul to reach. An investment fund from New York wanted to acquire the system he was running. Cash, equity benefits, an honorary advisory position. All he had to do was sign. Ethan studied the contract for a long moment, then placed his pen down on the table. "I did not build this to sell it the moment it became valuable," he said calmly. In the eyes of the shareholders there was surprise, even doubt. The man once labeled too cautious was now rejecting an enormous sum of money. What they did not understand was that he no longer chased numbers. He had already lost a marriage to illusions of framed success. He would not repeat the same mistake with himself. Across the city, Vanessa sat in a small office at a mid-sized startup. No grand title, no polished nameplate, just a standard human resources management position. She had started over from the beginning. No one there knew about the divorce, the courtroom, the printed messages laid out page by page. She worked hard, listened more than she spoke, no longer trying to prove she was superior. Therapy had helped her see clearly. She no longer blamed circumstances. She acknowledged her emotional greed, acknowledged the way she once treated marriage like a structure she could adjust to suit herself. One afternoon, while scrolling through industry news, she came across an interview with Ethan. The article described him as a long-term visionary leader. It highlighted how he had refused the buyout because he wanted to maintain strategic control. Vanessa read every line. She did not feel jealousy, only a quiet sadness no longer sharp. She once believed power meant controlling others. Now she understood power meant controlling yourself. In the seaside house, Ethan stood on the balcony watching the sunset. Olivia stepped outside and leaned gently against him. No drama, no noise, just two mature people sharing space and respect. Ethan reflected on his journey from the husband informed with a cold sentence that intimacy was over to the man who stood before a fortune and chose identity instead. The greatest twist was not winning in court. It was realizing he no longer needed to defeat anyone. He had once been underestimated, labeled predictable, and lacking ambition. But his ambition was never about display. His ambition was about living truthfully. In another corner of the city, Vanessa closed her laptop and turned off the office lights. She walked to the parking lot and inhaled deeply. She no longer waited for messages, no longer searched for validation. She learned to take responsibility for the past without allowing it to define her future. Two people, two paths, no longer intersecting, no more resentment, only lessons. Ethan stepped back inside and placed his hand on the doorframe. He understood that freedom does not come from cutting others off. It comes from cutting off the weaker version of yourself. That marriage was not entirely a mistake. It was a mirror. It reflected illusions, exposed dependency, forced both of them to grow, even if painfully. And if someone listening to this story is standing in a relationship that has rotted but is still afraid to leave, remember this. Staying is not always courage. Leaving when necessary is strength. If you have ever been underestimated, ever told you were too ordinary to do something extraordinary, look at the journey of a man who chose not to react with anger, but with action. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonates with you, press like and subscribe so you do not miss other journeys about betrayal, self-respect, and reclaiming your life. Because sometimes an ending is not a loss. It is a beginning.